Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench.
Hello, welcome back to the FOF Pod. Now today we're joined by British filmmaker Toby Kearton, who's an award-winning director, screenwriter and producer. He's best known for his independent short film Dissonance in 2018 and the short war films The Little Picture in 2018 and The Dust Child. Toby, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
First off, probably we should start. How did you get into the industry? What inspired you to become a filmmaker?
I think what it comes down to is when you watch films as a kid, you see the actors on screen. You don't know what any other department does. All you see is the actors. So being introduced to films, I wasn't really into sport when I was young. So I kind of gravitated towards films. And you obviously see the actors in there and you want to be the actor, right? And then when you realize the great thing about the films, this will show my age and I'm young, I'm sorry. Don't mean to make you guys feel old, but in the early 2000s, they were really great in doing a great deal of DVD extras, and you don't really see that anymore now. Now it's just talking heads. But back in the day, you had like hours of these great documentaries, like Pirates of the Caribbean did them and Lord of the Rings did them. And you had a really personal, in-depth, intimate access into the makings of those films. Yeah. And I remember watching those as a very, very young child thinking, my God, that's someone's job. Someone gets paid to do that. It's someone's job to kind of put all this stuff together, like a conductor, if you like. And I thought, I want to do that. So ever since then, I've really been actively involved in trying to make that happen. And I every day you have a bad day, I always say, I'm very lucky to know what I wanted to do from a very early age. It's just about getting there,
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So was there a moment where you were like, okay, so I want to do war, I want to explore the war genre. Is that something that was there from an early age as well?
Well, I've always loved my history. History and film are my two favorite kind of entities, and combining them seemed like an obvious thing to do. The reason why I like exploring war is, in particular, dramatically it offers the best kind of approach than any of the other genres, because you're literally dealing with life and death. And when it comes to making short films as well, I think what war does so well is it offers dramatically, I think, the best out of all the genres in terms of you're dealing with life and death. So the stakes are higher than any other genre. And also when you come from a short film, they always say, well, you can never see an arc of a character in a short film. And they are right, apart from war, because war is a catalyst for moral confliction and emotional change. So that's why I like to explore that genre personally, because you are able to use that, war in the background to really change and shape the way people think. And all great stories are a measure of change, either for the good or for the bad.
Yeah.
So, and again, dealing with morals and weighing up your morals, and as an audience member watching that and thinking, what would I do if I were there? I've got a bad option or a worse option. What do I choose? And they're the kind of elements I love to explore.
I was going to ask, off the back of what you were saying about behind the scenes and documentary making, but obviously a lot of your work has been traditional filmmaking in that it's telling a narrative story. Is documentary making something you're also interested in, or is that just something that feeds into that making of narrative pieces?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think what behind the scenes does so well is it gives you an insight into the craft and what it takes to make a film. And it's very rare you get to see now great filmmakers communicate with actors, communicate with crew. And those behind the scenes kind of featurettes are so wonderful because they really give you an insight onto how things are done, and how things can be avoided, or how things can be done differently to what people are doing. But I personally like to explore stories and narrative. Would I, in the future, like to do a documentary? Absolutely. I think I love historical documentary for sure. I watch them a great deal. Sometimes when I'm not in the mood to embark on a 2.5 hour film, I watch a documentary because they're very insightful. particularly on very disturbing subject matters like the Third Reich. They're very interesting to me. I find them very interesting. But yeah, no, there's lots of. Would I like to do that? Absolutely, I would. But I would only do it if I could find something that was very unique. If there was a very different perspective I could explore, I'd like to do it like that, rather than do something similar to something that someone has done, which is probably very good. So yeah, I like to explore different perspectives. Again, that's why I like to tell these particular stories. I try and find a way to tell it differently, or tell something that's already been told, but from either from a different perspective or from a different angle.
Yeah, no, I got that from the Dust Child. I really liked how that was poised. You're not expecting. I mean, spoiler for anyone who hasn't seen it. Please go and check out Toby Shortsley's YouTube channel because they are very, very well made. But spoiler alert for the Dust Child. Quick as we talk, you're not expecting the girl to pull the pin of that grenade at the end, and I like how you subverted that. I like how you did the twist there. I thought, another filmmaker would have had them save her, but you're showing that, there were young Viet Cong fighters. I just liked how you did that. So what inspired you to go to do that? Subvert that expectation that I had, at least.
I think it comes down to subverting tropes, and there's no happy ending in war. You can't say that war's a happy ending because it's unjustified. And every film that I've embarked on has been anti-war. Okay, and I think all the great films are. I can only think of one pro-war film, which was probably the Green Berets, which is, you better fight, fellas.
Yeah.
Fighting and killing is good. You should do it, right? Yeah. Every film that dealt with the genre, either it be World War I, World War II, Vietnam, they've always been anti-war. It's always been about the horrors of war, either the horrors of war or why war is futile. I think the horrors of war has been done so well. That's something that I don't really want to kind of dive into because it's been done so well. My favorite one being Come and See, which is a 1985 Russian film, which everyone should see, because that for me is the best depiction of the horrors of war. But I like to always explore the futility. And at the beginning of The Dust Child, there's a quote which kind of is the kind of golden thread through all my work, which is no good deed goes unpunished, but no good deed goes unpunished in war, because even an act of compassion in war can't be justified because you're still within the remit of conflict. So there's no justification. We think something good came from it until we realize what happens at the end. And it's just it's nice to leave an audience with their thoughts of, would I have done the same thing? Well, if I left her, I would have been killed, and if I saved her, I would have been killed. Okay, where does that leave me? So I like to offer that perspective. But yeah, there's a difference between a happy ending and an optimistic ending in the work that I do. I don't really like happy endings because we don't live in that time anymore. We don't. You just got to look outside. We don't live in that world anymore, I'm afraid. So if I want to put an ending that makes you think, I normally, especially in war, there's no happy endings. The film that I'm recently embarking on, that I'm in post-production of, there's a happy ending within the confines of the film. It's optimistic.
Sure.
But as an audience, with the knowledge that we have of what's to come in the future, we know for a fact that that ending is not good. And that's an interesting thing that cinema offers. Right. And that's another reason why I like to explore the genre of war, because we just don't learn. And people will have to keep telling these stories because we're still fighting now. And we think that going to war and, killing one another is justified. It's worth it.
That's one of the things that the genre unfortunately has in its back pocket, that there's always going to be conflict, and there's always going to be people that are going to want to retell and put their stamp on conflicts from film. And I think that's why we enjoy seeing how this genre develops. And about what you think, Matt, about that.
No, I agree. I think there's always going to be room for that narrative aspect of showing what conflict can make humans do. And that's what makes the war movie genre so broad and powerful, because there's so much you can do within the context of a conflict. And I just taking like the little picture, that's just a couple of guys in a house, but so much is said in that short 10 minutes. It's quite impressive.
What's interesting about the idea of war is that films especially, they're tailored towards the times. So when you come out of World War II and you see the films that were being made in 1945, 1946, compared to the films that were made in the 60s, compared to films that were made now, even right now, I mean, I'm sure there'll be a whole plateau of films about war coming off what's happening now, and how they're redefined when you look at a film. I mean, it's just quite funny. Like, I love James Bond, and a lot of the Bond movies, the villains are always the Russians, right? And going to the Cold War, and even coming out of the Cold War. And now you watch those films, and with the knowledge that we have now about what's going on in contemporary times, and it kind of creates new ideas. And depending on where we are in history, the films are kind of recontextualized, especially war films. You know,
we're going to get a fresh glut of Cold War movies now that
absolutely,
the enemy.
Absolutely. But
it's coming
very
full circle. The Russians will be the enemy again in 5 years' time. Again, it's crazy. It really is.
Yeah, but they're always recontextualized, and that's very interesting. I can't think of a genre other than war that kind of does that as effectively, because it's probably also the oldest genre of film other than the Western.
Yeah,
it's probably killing, with guns, man versus man, mentality versus mentality.
I mean, we always say there's a British war film about the Boer War that was made in like 1898, Matt, or something.
Yeah, it's really
silent
early
film, really early. And
it's surprisingly ambitious as well.
Yeah, it's quite good. We have to review it.
We will actually. We really should.
Yeah. So coming off of that, I mean, this is more of a production type question, but what are the most challenging aspects of making a war short, a film? What are the challenges there?
Well, there's two elements. There's obviously the business side of things, and there's the creative side of things. So from the business perspective, films about history cost money, and they're more expensive than contemporary film. So your budget doubles, all right, which isn't very attractive to financiers. But you have to convince them that it can only be told this way. And it is worth it, because not a lot of people do them. They just don't. I mean, a lot of people my age don't really find it interesting. They find it a very dusty kind of, has-been type of thing. Like, oh, it's, no one makes those type of films anymore. And they don't. They really don't. So I love them. I think there's an audience for them, and there's an audience for the things that I would like to say. So I find it very important to do that. And again, it's always about, are you interested about telling that story? And if you are, tell it. And you've got to be very interested about it. You've got to be as interested on day one than you are on day 205, because otherwise it's just not worth your time, because it takes up your life. But to go back to your question, in terms of the challenges, it's expensive. So you have to convince these guys who are, putting the money on the table, why it needs to be told. So that's a very challenging thing from the beginning. And then when it comes down to the world you need to construct, obviously it takes a great deal of research. I love research. I adore research. And don't get me wrong, don't let history get in the way of a good story. Don't let that happen. Mel Gibson could only tell Braveheart if they wore kilts. I'm sure it wouldn't have been a finance film if everyone ran around naked, painted blue, because he wouldn't have got his ratings. So you have to take license. Don't let facts get in the way of a good story. However, saying that, there's no excuse not to do the research and not to get the facts right. So if he's holding a AK-47 in a film about the Boer War, there's going to be problems, and there's no excuses to make those mistakes, because we have such a wealth of resources today to make those things, and there's no harm in getting someone, an advisor, or going to a museum. Like for the film I recently did, I had a kind of debate over what kind of boots the British soldier wore at that time, and also would German soldiers at the end of the First World War wear puttees or boots because there was a leather shortage. I wanted to know. And again, you have to be a stickler for detail, because there is going to be someone watching that thing like, that ain't right, and it will take them out of the film. All right,
us and our listeners,
right, right. So go to the Imperial War Museum. It's free. It's down the street, and look. And I found my answers from just going there. So There's no
Mm.
excuses. So I'm a stickler. I'm the kind of person, I think, as you and the listeners are, that would see something and be like, "That's wrong," and then that's all you're thinking about, and then the film loses legitimacy for you. So you're like, "Yeah."
We have a thing
And
where you can. I mean, I don't know if you might agree, you might not, but we have a thing where we think if the movie is a bad piece of film, that stuff always rankles a hell of a lot more. But if the movie's a genuinely good piece of film, then we can let slide a
Oh, yeah.
wrong jacket or a wrong boot or something like that. But I think these things, for me and Matt at least, they only really boil to the surface when the film is just an unenjoyable
Yeah.
watching experience. Yeah, that makes
I mean,
sense, doesn't it?
it does.
Yeah.
And I've learned from my mistakes as well. I've made some cataclysmic errors that I see now. I think, oh my God, what was I thinking? And even the films that you mentioned that I did some time ago, there's errors in there historically, which today, it pains me because I could have done the extra work and found the right weapon or found the right, I should have done things differently. So it happens, which again makes you learn moving forward
it's
to
growth.
be an extra stickler, and it's growth. We all learn, right? But the film that I recently embarked on, which was a World War One piece, again, I'm ticking off all the wars. I've done Vietnam, World War Two, I had an advisor with us, and I had a historical advisor and technical advisor. So if you can get them, like you can, why wouldn't you?
Yeah, you mentioned ticking off every conflict there. I mean, what what would you, if you could choose any conflict or any war to set a story within, what would you choose?
That's a very good question. I would choose something that hasn't been done a great deal. Obviously, there's a wealth of World War II, because World War II was a war of hatred, ideological hatred, as was Vietnam. World War One wasn't a war of hatred, which why it hasn't been explored as much. It was, it is, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, assassinated, right? We're your friends, we're their friends. And you try and explain to someone that was there why they were there, I'm sure they wouldn't be able to tell you,
Sure.
So dramatically, it offers something very different in comparison to what World War II or Vietnam does. But a film that I'd like to explore that hasn't been done a great deal. So it's a good question. I mean, the Boer War is an interesting one. You don't see many of those.
Really.
No.
Not really.
You don't see a lot of the Falklands. You don't see a lot of Korea. So yeah, it could be interesting. And obviously, they've done a great deal of the Cold War and espionage, which is obviously the war with no bullets. But yeah, probably the Boer War. And I love the idea of doing something about a war I don't know anything about, and then offering new understandings and perspectives through the research, and then finding a way to do it. I love to do something about Napoleon. I love to do something about the Napoleonic War when it was going badly. I love to do like a downfall, but with Napoleon. that would be
something. Yeah,
that would be really interesting. Yeah.
Napoleon on the latrine for 3 days, and people knocking on the latrine saying, "Look, man, we got to sort some stuff out," and the kind of delusionment which comes with failure and ego and being the narcissism and the understanding of how that could slip away and what that means for someone. That's something I'd love to do. But all of the great, in my opinion, all the great war films, we can dwell on this a bit later. All the great war films, I think, has war as the background. And the main core of the story is about the characters and how they respond to their situations. All of the greatest films about the genre deal with that. The war's normally in the background and you hear it, and obviously we have sequences where we're through it, but it's about the characters and it's about what their understanding is and what's their understanding about who they are. They're the best stories.
What do you think about the future? Because we talk about this on the podcast a lot. Where do you think the genre is going in terms of cinema and things? Because I personally feel that, say again, the listeners will be sick of hearing it, but I feel that it's becoming more of an event piece. So we get a 1917, we wait a few years, we've just had a Dunkirk, now we've just had All Quiet on the Western Front. I feel like they're just becoming, you get one every 2 or 3 years, it's a massive budgeted piece. Where do you think the genre's going?
Well, there's 2 ways you can take it. I mean, as you said, we want to get people in the cinema. We want to get people seeing a film on a big screen. I mean, don't get me wrong. The great thing about a film like a war film is that it's very grandiose. So you can put it on a big screen. And I saw All Quiet on the Western Front in a theater I saw it in Santa Monica at the Bay Theater in Los Angeles. And don't get me wrong, it's impressive when you're there for over 2 hours and you come out of it speechless because you feel so drained of what you're seeing. It's a feeling you get, and you can only get it on a big screen. But I think if you have a combination of something that's very, very intimate and something that's very grandiose, something like Paths of Glory, which is probably my favorite war film, which has a really great combination of personal moral confliction and then the grandiose of war. But again, it's all about how you present it. I think as of now, you're going to get far more. I think the reason we're seeing them is because of what's happening in our world. And I think from what's happened this year, we're going to get more personal films, I think, more personal films about what war does to people who don't choose war, right? And the people that suffer in war are civilians and are people, right? So where's the genre going to go? We may hark back to wars of the past and draw parallels to what's happening now, which is, I think, why they're being made. But where do I think the genre is going to go? I mean, I thought some time ago that, you would go more towards chemical war and nuclear war, and you'd explore that, like your war games or but yeah. I think now I think what they're going to do is they're going to take events from our past and find a way to relate them to what's happening now. To, again, state the obvious, which is we haven't learned, and a reminder that nothing good comes from war. It's futile.
Hello there, sorry to interrupt. I wanted to let you know that you can now join our supporting cast over on Patreon. As thanks for your support, you'll be able to help us pick films, submit questions for guests, have first pick on brand new and exclusive merch, and much more. Thank you for your support. Now back to the show.
So, as always, we ask our Patreons to submit their questions for our guests. So we have a few for you today, Toby. So Thomas McCall asks, what classic war film inspires Toby with his work, and does he have a favourite war movie or particular scene that he thinks is perfect?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. Again, I love the films. I love anti-war because it's truthful and honest. Again, my favourite film about war, probably Paths of Glory, Stanley Kubrick. And my favourite scene in that film, or a scene that I think is fantastic in any film that's done really well. I think a scene that's done really well is in the original All Quiet on the Western Front from 1930, which I know is an American production about a German story, but still, you can forgive them for that. There's a really wonderful scene in that film at the end, right at the end. Spoilers, it came out in 1930, so sorry, guys. There's a moment in the film where he goes back to the front and he finds this butterfly and this small element of beauty. We're reminded, the reason that scene is so effective is we're reminded of the beauty of our world. And it's the last point of the film to take away from the film, which is why? Why do we need to do this? And you get that in a butterfly. And the reason, and I love the symbol of a butterfly. I've paid homage to it in a recent film that I'm working on because people haven't seen it in nearly 100 years. So I thought it would be worth. I'm using it in a different context. But I think that scene has been done so well and so perfectly. It summarized everything you need to just in an image.
It's very powerful.
So that would be my favorite.
Yeah,
that's really interesting actually, because of course in the book the butterfly isn't there. So that's an adaptation by the filmmaker. So jumping off of Thomas's question, if there was a work of fiction that you could adapt in a similar way to All Quiet on the Western Front, what would you choose?
Well, that's a great question.
That's a hard question, I know.
That's a good one, man.
I'll tell you exactly what I'd do. There's a book written by a fella called Robert Graves, and it's called Goodbye to All That.
Right.
And if you haven't read this book, I imagine you have to read it. I was in Ypres doing research for this upcoming project I've been working on. And I had a tour of the graveyard of the war battlefields and of the cemeteries there. And I was recommended by the tour guide to read this book, because it's all about a man in the First World War, and it's written at a time where people didn't talk about their horrors or about the experiences. And the way it's written written in a very contemporary way. So it was written in the 1916, 17, but it reads as a contemporary book, but it really channels the horrors of what it means to be there. I would have loved to adapt that, or find a way to take Robert Graves' account and channel it into a piece of work, because it's really quite something. I mean, I read that book when it was in this summer, and I got goosebumps in the heat wave. So it just goes to show what that book can do and the power of that material.
I haven't read that. I'll have to look it up.
Yeah, we always say there's a plethora of untapped military fiction and fiction based on people's actual experiences. It just hasn't been adapted yet, and it's criminal that some of these books haven't been optioned, or if they have been optioned, they're just being sat on, so no one else can make them by greedy studios. But yeah, that's a topic for another day. So moving on, Andrew CG asks, do you make short films because that is what you can currently afford, or is it the format that allows you to say what you want to say? And if you were not constrained by, we did this earlier, but if you were not constrained by a budget, would you make bigger / longer movies?
Okay. If money was no object, yeah, I mean, obviously you'd find a way to tell something that was very truthful from a design standpoint. But again, obviously you have more options with more budget in terms of what you can do. I mean, I can't think of a film as visually impressive as the 1965 War and Peace, which is 7 hours long, which you should definitely watch. It's phenomenal. But in terms of, it's phenomenal. But finding a way to tell a story, I mean, what I tend to do, which is why it is difficult to tell a story about war on a budget. But if you get your wardrobe right and you get your props right, location you can kind of accommodate. You can, in terms of the lenses you choose and how you choose to shoot it. There's always a way to do it. So get your costumes right, get your wardrobe right, and get your props right, and get a makeup artist so these guys actually have dirt in their fingernails, right, and have brown teeth. Okay, that's really important. I'm sick and tired of seeing films where the uniform is nicely pressed when they're on the field, or come on, guys. There's no excuse. But you can find a way. Don't get me wrong. As a filmmaker, the idea of having more money is a wonderful thing. But at the same time, more money is more problems, and I feel like it does restrict creativity. I'm pretty sure if Spielberg had unlimited funds for Jaws, you would see more of the shark, and the film wouldn't be as good. I think there's a way which it forces you to become creative. How can I tell something this way? Oh, I can tell it in silhouette, or I can find a creative cut to convey the death of a character. Rather than getting a real hangman's noose, I can convey it through the context of a cut. But again, I think it forces you to think more creatively. But there's two sides of that argument. There's the more money, more problems argument, and then there's the, well, let's work what we have and let's be intuitive with what we have.
So what kind of budgets are you, if you don't mind sharing, what kind of budgets are you actually working with when you make something? Like, just on, if there's an average, I don't know.
Well, it really depends. It depends where you are. It depends, like if you're filming in America to compare to filming in Britain, it's obviously different. It's also different if you're filming in London, if you're filming up north. There's lots of variables in terms of, are we buying our own wardrobe? Are we renting our own wardrobe? Are we, there's lots of variables. I mean, it's 5 figures for sure, right? But the Dust Child was made for, little to no money. Example, because we only had 7 hours to film it, because that's all we could afford. We had to get a Malibu Creek kind of officer with us. Malibu Creek State Park, for people that don't know, is where we filmed The Dust Child, which is where we wanted, how we kind of created it to look like Vietnam, which I think it sells pretty well. But we could only afford the Walden for 7 hours. So that's all we had to film. But there's always ways you can get away with it. and there's always a way.
Yeah, and you're right. I think the whole thing about money being limiting, but also being freeing, is really interesting. There's other people we've talked to who have had the same experience. Yeah,
Oh yeah, always. But you get given the budget sheet, and you think, my God, that's great. That's we can do anything, and then it just evaporates. You know, after you've kind of covered the necessities of film production, like insurance and food and accommodation and wardrobe, it just goes. I think out of all honesty, if you can find a way to tell a very personal, again, I think that's one of the reasons maybe why I've kind of gone to the direction of making more personal work and more intimate work about character, is because that doesn't cost money.
yeah.
It costs money to get the reenactment guys to come in and do a Napoleonic war with cannons and horses. That costs money, right? But to do something that's, the characters have either come from somewhere or are going to somewhere, which is kind of where all of my work thus far has kind of been from. It's either the aftermath or they're going somewhere, which is quite nice. So we're this little window into this world. But the great thing, money's a blessing and a curse. And I think if you can use it to your advantage and get creative with what you have, there's no limitations. There's no limitations.
Outside of money, I mean, what are the biggest challenges to filmmaking for an independent filmmaker?
Money's definitely the biggest one. I think people have forgotten how to tell stories. I do. I think that's the biggest challenge. The biggest challenge is to find a story worth telling, and to find a way creatively interesting and honest and truthful in a way that it hasn't been done before. I do believe that. I believe a lot of the films I see are just a collection of scenes strung together, and there's no golden thread. There's no kind of thematic understanding of why the film has been made. I always like to ask people, not out of a, I just, I like to ask, why did you make that? And if they can't answer me, then I, do you know what I mean? I think it's very important that there's a reason behind why you're deciding to make the film. And everything should relate to that one idea. Every scene should relate to that theme of what you're trying to say with the work. And don't get me wrong, an audience may have different understanding of what the work means. That's absolutely fine. Everyone's right, okay? But I love the idea of when going in, you know exactly why you're telling the story. And then ensuring it is a story. There's an element of growth. Someone wants something is standing in their way in order to get it, and they have to overcome that in order to get that. That's Greek storytelling. I do believe that people have forgotten what that is. They get very excited about the prospect of going somewhere and filming something, rather than beforehand maybe understanding of why we're doing that and how can we do it, which makes it honest and truthful. That's, I think, is the biggest, because everyone can make a film these days. I feel like a lot of people don't think about, well, this is going to be immortalized forever. Let's make it count. Let's actually think. And I think that's the biggest challenge that people are. They kind of dive into it without thinking about why. So yeah, that's for me. But also in terms of getting people together, and it's a miracle that any film gets made. Honestly, it really is, because it's so many things. The stars have to align. You have to get people together. You have to get actors who are willing to do it for little to nothing, who have belief in the material. And you have to work with a great collaborative crew that get exactly what you're trying to convey. It's very important that you find a crew that can work with you and that gets what you're trying to say. So we're all making the same movie. I think some of the reasons that some films fall short is that someone has a lack of understanding, either from the technical side of things or from the creative side of things, of what the story is trying to achieve. So then you've got a guy shooting it, in an interesting way that doesn't align with what you want to say, or an actor makes a choice that is tonally inappropriate to where you're trying to go. So it's very important to ensure that everyone, casting your crew is like casting your actors. Okay, it is. Do you have an understanding visually of what we're trying to do, and creatively what we're trying to achieve? So getting everyone who's singing from the same hymn sheet is also another challenge, because again, people get very excited about making films rather than understanding what we're trying to achieve.
And well, our last question comes from Andrew again. He asks, do you prefer writing the story or bringing a story to life through the directing?
I love both. I love to interpret someone else's material and find a way to make it right for me. I think always when a director gets another script, they always do a pass themselves. They always do, even if they don't tell the writer or the producers. They always do a pass themselves because they have to make it their own, and they have to find themselves in the material. They've got to make it very personal, I think, in order to make something truthful and honest. So I haven't done a lot of that. I'd like to do more of it, where I get to direct other people's work. For an independent, and this kind of relates to the other question of the difficulties of independent filmmaking. If you want to be a director, you got to be able to write, and you got to read screenplays and find a way. The most challenging thing, I believe, in the creative process is to convey emotion on paper, and then finding a way then to take that and visualize it into something that's meaningful. But you have to be able to write. I never used to like writing. Now I adore it. It's a beautiful thing because you can direct on the page and not spend any money. It's great. So it's, but you have to love it. Like I wake up every morning and I write, like I just have to do it. So as of right now, a lot of my opportunities that I've created are through writing my own work and then getting it in the hands of people that can then find a way to finance the picture and get it made. So if you have a story that you really want to tell, you should probably write it down. Okay. And then I'm sure you'll be able to find a way to make it work. Like, for example, the film called Camera that I'm in post-production of, the World War I piece. I wrote that during the lockdown. You know, I heard a story and I thought this has to be made, and I crafted it, and that's how it was made. But I do like to write, and I do like to adapt other people's writing. So both.
So Toby, what can you tell us about what you're working on at the moment or what's coming up?
So the film that I'm currently working on that's in post-production is set during the First World War. I can't really tell you a lot about it because it will give it away. And it's only a 10-minute film. So it's within the confines of a specific amount of time. But it's the reason I wanted to make it is because of what's happening in our world right now. And despite writing it before the most recent war in our world, in our times has happened, made me more justified to tell it. And I think the timing is perfect, because again, it reminds people of the futility of war, but it's done in a very interesting way. It's not done through violence, like in The Dust Child. It's not done through the horrors of war. It's done based on the notion that we know what happens in our future and that we won't learn. And I think I've never really told a story before that enables the audience to bring a great deal to the table. This one does. This one allows you to kind of be an active participant in the viewing of the film. It's very, I like my subtlety, and with this one it's very subtle. I think the audience will have lots of different interpretations of what's happening and why it's happening. But it's a short film, but I'm pretty sure, hopefully my goal is for the audience to think about it after it's over for at least an hour. So it's technically a feature film. The audience are thinking about, what would I do if I was there? What does this mean? How could this have been prevented? Could it be prevented? And there's all these questions, and my job is to ask questions. My job isn't to answer them. And I hopefully people will be arguing in the car on the way home or arguing on the way to the fridge of what that means. And that's my goal as a filmmaker. I always love the idea of creating a conversation, creating a discussion over a piece of work. And I think it allows us as humans to kind of look at ourselves in a different way. That all great work, I think, constitutes that, which is we look at ourselves differently as a result of being exposed to it. So that's always been my goal as a filmmaker. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, when's the release date for that one?
I believe the release date will be early next year, January next year. We're very close, very close. It's obviously, it's a process making a film. There's so many different departments. There's so many different things juggling. And I did all the editorial in post-production. All the post-production essentially was done in the States. So I've just come back from there. We were doing the mix is being done now, and the music is, I work with the composer out there and the editor out there. So I don't know, getting away, I think, from the heart of where you film the film, I think it is a really nice thing. And to work with people that had nothing to do with the production, because they offer new perspectives and new ideas on how to add value to it, is a wonderful thing. I have edited before, but working with an editor is a wonderful thing, because you give them your footage and they go on the script, but they go with what you have. You know, you write and shoot and edit 3 different movies, and at the end of the day, the only one people are going to see is the one that's being pieced together. So working with someone that had no understanding of obviously they have understanding, but no relation to what happened on the day or days, they can offer very new perspectives, which is a fantastic thing. So it's been a really great process. But yeah, I look forward to sharing it with everyone.
Yeah, no, we look forward to seeing it. I've seen some of the production stills. It looks like it's going to be quite something. So thanks, Toby, for joining us. It's been such an insight into your world and your work. And if you haven't seen any of Toby's films, they are on his YouTube channel. So please do go and find them. We'll be sharing them on our socials as well, so our listeners can get a view. And thank you for joining us. It's been fantastic, Toby. Thank you. And as always, you can follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, we're on everything. We're not on OnlyFans just yet, but you never know the way Twitter's going. We might have to. But you can catch the podcast from episode 1 over at fightingonfilm.com. And if you have a FOF binge, do let us know. And we'll catch you next week, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Bye, guys.
Bye.